Ferrari at breakfast on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
10 to 8, back to our conversation about police vetting in a moment, but let's pick up on one of the headlines we looked at the start of the show, the front page of the Times, concerning levelling up and the allegation that the cash favours the South East over the Red Wall. Let's put that to a man who should know, Conservative MP and Levelling Up Secretary, also Housing Communities Secretary as well, Michael Gove, who joins me from Blackpool. Mr Gove, respond if you would. The cash is going to the South East, not to the Red Wall, is what many people are saying, including, I have to say, some unnamed Tory MPs. Your reaction? Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. Well, that's simply not true. The amount of money that we're spending per capita is much higher in the northwest and the northeast. The reason I'm here in Blackpool is that we're spending £40 million on a new higher education campus here on the Lancashire coast. The biggest single project that's being backed is a new Eden project just up the coast in Morecambe. And the reason why we're making that investment is we're doing everything we can in order to provide high-quality jobs for the future in areas that have been undervalued in the past.
How is it decided where the cash goes, Secretary of State?
Ministers set out certain priorities. We basically say we want to make sure these projects are deliverable, they're high quality, that they fit with other economic investments, and we say that we want a good geographical spread, and in particular, we want to help areas which have got lower economic productivity or have had in the past. Then people bid. Experts in government departments crunch the numbers, look through them, and then they present a shortlist to ministers for approval.
You talk about lower economic productivity. The constituency of Richmond in Yorkshire is receiving £19 million worth of funding. I understand it's a fairly wealthy part of the country. Might this be to do with the fact that its MP is Rishi Sunak?
No, it's nothing to do with that. It's everything to do with the fact that the money is going to Catterick, which I think is the biggest infantry base in the country, and the money is going to make sure that the neighbourhood in which service families live is invested in appropriately. Over the past few weeks, as you know, Nick, I've been looking at the quality of service family accommodation. It struck me and others in government that we need to do more in order to improve the way in which our service families are looked after, and I think that putting armed force families first is a good thing.
London is to get £151 million for projects including doubling the frequency of trains near Sutton, and also, it's reported in the Times, £43 million for step-free access to Leighton and Colindale underground stations. Secretary of State, why does it cost £43 million for two underground stations to have step-free access?
Well, there's broader improvements around Leighton and Colindale, but again, you're quite right to point out that there is money that is going to improve transport in parts of London and the South East, and it's going to those areas which are most in need of support in order to improve economic productivity and to overcome deprivation.
But Secretary of State, £43 million for step-free access to two underground. What are the steps made of? Gold?
I think it's rather more than just step-free access. I think there are other improvements that are being made to the operation of both of those stations. But all of the bids have been rigorously assessed by civil service teams in order to ensure value for money. And again, there are some bids that were put forward which were meritorious, which weren't necessarily absolutely on the button, and we'll be working with people in order to ensure that some of the other bids that didn't make it this time, but were close to the line, are funded in the future.
Can we stay with the Times newspaper, a title you know well? Yesterday, it was reported that Conservative MPs in marginal seats have been told not to use the expression levelling up and instead use stepping up, enhancing communities or gauging up. Is that true? And if so, why?
No, levelling up is absolutely the central domestic mission of this government. We want to ensure more economic growth across the country, particularly in areas where there have been lower productivity, and that is why we are not just investing cash, because that on its own doesn't do enough. It's also why we're empowering local people and making sure that we work with the private sector in order to provide people with high-value jobs in areas that have been overlooked and undervalued in the past. So it is, it's very, very rare that I ever have to correct any journalist, and here it's only a very gentle one. Levelling up, absolutely central.
All right. First-time Conservative voter in the last election, perhaps in Sedgefield or Redcar, lending the Conservatives their vote, looking forward to levelling up, which is still on the agenda. And they hear today that there's going to be step-free access to Colindale Station, Underground Station in London, and an Eden project in Morecambe. Is that what they were voting for, Secretary of State?
Well, if they're in Teesside, if they're in Hartlepool, they'll be seeing significant new money being spent on media jobs in Hartlepool, in a film and TV cultural initiative. If they're in the Tees Valley, they will also see money being spent on significant transport infrastructure across the Tees Valley that will help people get to jobs there. And of course, just last week, I authorised an additional £15 million to be spent to the Mayor of Teesside, Ben Houchin, amazing guy, in order to ensure that there was additional investment in Teesside Airport, which he's transformed from a mothballed, economic desert into a hive of economic activity. So all of that is investment in Teesside. It's natural, of course, that when you have good investments which are successful, that people will want to celebrate in their own communities, and other communities will say, what is next for me? Well, what is next is the next round of the Levelling Up Fund. So some areas that haven't quite made it this time, we hope to be able to help in the future.
If we move away from the mothballs to other matters, Extinction Rebellion threw black paint over your office yesterday in protest over your decision to allow coal mining in Cumbria. Can I get your response? Might it alter your decision, Secretary of State?
No, it won't.
None whatsoever. Even your fellow Conservative MP and the government's climate czar, Chris Skidmore, says the coal mine should not proceed. How come you know better?
I don't, but the inspector does. So the planning inspector looked very closely at the case for opening a new coal mine, and it's important to stress that in his report, which I would encourage everyone to read in full, he made the point that this will be a net zero mine. The coal produced is not there for energy generation. The coal produced is there specifically in order to ensure that we can continue steel production in this country. It's coking coal, and the point he makes is that environmentally it is better that if we're going to use coal for steel, that we use coal that is mined in the UK rather than imported from Australia or perhaps even worse, well, certainly worse, Russia.
Indeed worse. I appreciate you've been busy and travelling this morning. Hopefully you or one of your colleagues has made you aware of the front page of today's Daily Telegraph, in which Sir James Dyson, of course the technology entrepreneur, says the short-sighted and stupid economic approach of Rishi Sunak's government is keeping Britain in a state of COVID inertia and holding back the economy. What would you say to Sir James?
I'd say respectfully to Sir James, because I'm a huge fan of his, great man, a brilliant inventor.
Do you have one of his vacuum cleaners,
someone whom I've enjoyed working with in the past.
Do you have one of his vacuum cleaners, Mr Gove?
I don't. I'm not going to go for product placement and endorsement, other than saying he's a great guy. But I respectfully disagree with him. We're spending £20 billion on research and development across the country. We are absolutely committed to economic growth. And earlier this week, the Cabinet was looking at how we can improve regulation in a variety of areas, some of which are very close to Sir James's heart. You know, he's a guy who wants the whole country to do even better, and that sort of ambition is admirable. But I would say to Sir James and others that this government is absolutely committed to increasing economic growth. It's one of the top priorities that Rishi outlined at the beginning of the year, and we're investing in research and development, I think, as Sir James was arguing for in his piece, and we're also looking at regulation now. We're outside the European Union to help unlock the animal spirits of the economy in a way that I hope Sir James would approve.
Well, if you're focused on it, why are the figures so disappointing? Up to the period ending of September last year, growth was at 0.2%.
Yes, and we all know that is a consequence of A, the long tail of COVID, B, the constriction of global supply lines, C, Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine and the impact that had on energy prices in particular and global inflation overall. So across the globe, countries have been hit by that. But again, that only makes it more important that we get investment of the kind that we've got here in Blackpool, in high-value jobs in the future, that we look at regulation, as the Chancellor has been doing, in order to unlock money from pension funds for investment in companies. And we also continue to make sure that we remain competitive. And I think it's the case that the UK is one of the most attractive countries for foreign direct investment, I think third in the world. So, you know, we have to keep up. absolutely right. High ambition, being held to account. But I think it's also important to look at these recent difficult figures in that context.
Last couple of questions. One of your colleagues, Simon Clark, is quoted as saying, as regards nurses, if you're using food banks and your average salary is £35,000 a year, something is wrong with your budgeting. £35,000 is not a salary on which you want to be relying on food banks. Is he right?
Well, Simon's a friend of mine, so I don't want to criticise him personally.
What about his views?
I wouldn't have.
Let's take the personal out of it. What about his views, Mr. Gove?
Well, I respectfully disagree with him on this question.
Well, what would you say to him then, having said that?
Well, in any conversation with Simon, I would keep it private and cordial and respectful, but because I think that in conversations about people's personal finances, it is important to maintain that respect.
Okay, and my last but one question on the subject of personal finances. Another of your colleagues, Nadim Zahawi, the headlines continue to swirl about whether he did or did not mislead journalists about business dealing months before settling a multi-million-pound tax bill. He chairs your party. We need a statement from Mr Zahawi, don't we?
Well, he's paid all his taxes. That's a good thing. It's when people don't pay their taxes that it's an issue.
Yes, but he denied, without going into too much detail, he denied having an interest in Bolshore Investments, a Gibraltar company, being a beneficiary at any point, despite you, Gov, describing it as a family trust of Nadim Zahawi. I put to you again, we need a statement to clear this all up, don't we, Mr Gove?
Well, HMRC are the people who look at people's tax affairs. If HMRC are happy, if the money's been paid, then that's fine. I mean, again, personal finances are a personal issue. If people aren't paying the taxes, that is an issue. But if you've paid all your taxes, then I don't think it is.
All right. Lastly, what are you standing in front of? Is that some gym equipment on which you're about to work out or something?
No, what I'm standing in front of is a magnificent piece of engineering. Here in Blackpool and Fylde College, there are students who are, in particular, looking at how we can move towards heat pumps, how we can move away from high-carbon heating systems to low-carbon heating systems. When I was here in the past, I saw some of the apprentices who were developing the energy systems of the future, and the workshop here is one of the areas where they work. Part of the investment here in the multiversity will mean that more and more young people will get jobs in energy in the future, and frankly, investment in this area is going gangbusters, and young people here have an opportunity to have jobs in engineering, jobs in manufacturing, which will lead to a renaissance in the northwest.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your time joining us from Blackpool. Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, Michael Gove, appearing here on LBC, where at 3 minutes after 8 the news is next.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.